you learn by doing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to learn a lot by watching him take depositions over and over and over again. Eventually you got to get your feet wet.
No, you're going to learn to fall asleep.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to learn.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm Megan Henry, and today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Jen Mayer, who is the CEO of 1776. And I'm so excited to have her on because she's had such an interesting career path from, working at a big law firm to then, working at a startup and now being a CEO. And she just has a super drive to succeed and stay busy. And so she's a delight to talk to. So I'm going to bring her in. Hey, Jen, thanks for joining me today on The Defense Never Rests. I am so happy to have you on. I think I asked you to come on this podcast maybe like a year or so ago when we were just getting started. And now I think we're 67 episodes in. So yay us.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations.
Thanks. So, for our listeners, we were supposed to chat last week and you were stuck in Utah. So what happened?
Yeah, we, like most people, haven't really done anything for about a year. And we're trying to think of things that we could actually do in a safe manner during this time. And I have been skiing pretty much my whole life, and I got my kids going pretty early on. And we've, like a lot of people, had a lot of trips planned over the last 12 months, and we were just canceling. And this one was on the books, and we had some school protocols to abide by and some other things. But once that we got close, it was probably about 2 days before we left that we decided we were definitely going to go. So we went. We figured skiing is a outside, distant, masked activity. So it checked a lot of those boxes. And then a massive snowstorm came across half of the country. So our flight got canceled like 3 or 4 times, and we kept getting rebooked and canceled again. And part of the problem was that we were connecting through Texas, which was frozen over with no electric and no water. So I'm thankful that we didn't actually make it out and got stuck in Texas.
Right.
But we ended up having to stay there like an extra three days, which was not obviously the worst thing in the world. But there was a lot of logistics to work through from that.
Yeah. But I mean, getting stuck in Utah during a snowstorm is not during a ski trip is probably ideal.
Yeah, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Better to get stuck where you are. And thankfully we were able to extend our reservations. We were able to get longer where we were staying. So that we
weren't homeless.
Yes. And our kids were, ecstatic to get some extra time, but it's always just fun adventures.
I was talking about skiing with a friend of mine, because I skied my whole life too, and I haven't taken my kids yet. And we're same thing. We're like, oh, it's such a great COVID activity because you're already distanced, you're already wearing masks. But we were wondering how does the lodge work? Because that is not very distant.
Yeah.
If I can think of one of the most claustrophobic places, it's a ski lodge.
Right. They actually did a really great job. One, you're not allowed inside the lodge without reservations. So you can't just go in, a lot of them are set up as like giant cafeterias where you're just going in and grabbing your hot fare during lunch. So you're not allowed in unless you have a reservation. And with that, they're at like 25% capacity as well. So they just removed all the tables. So you're only allowed to sit with 4 people. They're all pretty spaced out. And the nice thing about being out west versus East Coast skiing is it's still relatively warm out. So there's actually a lot of outside dining. So you can eat outside at a lot of the lodges as well. But I thought they did a great job. They were really strict about mask wearing, like in the lift lines and other pieces that you have to make a reservation even to ski. So they're reducing capacity of people that are on the mountain as well. So I thought we were at Park City, which is Vail Resorts, and I thought they just did a fantastic job of complying with everything.
Yeah, that actually makes it even more ideal. I remember growing up going, on the weekend ski trips to Vermont, and it being it was like everyone went that same weekend, and it was so crowded, and it was so icy and just miserable, but you just did it anyway.
This was our kids' first West Coast trip, and I started East Coast skiing when I was 5 and didn't get out into the West until I was like 30. So they're spoiled early on with like really nice, fresh powder, warm skiing. I don't know if I'm going to be able to convince them to go back to Vermont
or the Poconos.
Yeah,
that's going to be a tough sell.
Where it's 6 degrees and there's no gondola.
Yeah. Well, you made your bed. So
Yeah.
now you're stuck with it. Just gonna have to go out West every single year.
Yeah. It was selfish though, because my daughter was into it and she really enjoyed it. But my son actually asked for extra ski days, which was like the whole selfish purpose for me wanting to go, is to get my kids hooked on it. And he was really, really into it this year.
Oh, that's awesome. I need to, next year, maybe we'll do it.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's hop into we're going to hop into your background, and then we're going to get into what you're currently doing. But, so for, the listeners, you and I went to law school together. And like for myself, I never thought I would go to law school. I had this whole medical path that, just took a right hook. But when you were in college, was law school always your intention, or was it something that just kind of fell into place for you?
Yeah, so we had opposite life goals, I guess, growing up. I was, I don't know, 10 years old when I decided I wanted to be an attorney, and never wanted to do anything different. That was it. So even when you're younger and kids are, I want to be an astronaut this week, and then the next week they want to be a chef. I never had that. I wanted to be an attorney always. And that was it. That was my mission.
So do you remember why? Like, what was it? Is it just because like when you were, it was like you only knew like 2 different types of careers at that point? Like...
It's a wildly specific and super dorky story on why I wanted to be an attorney. So neither one of my parents went to college. This was not like I was exposed to a lot of the law or anything. But when I was 9 years old was the 1992 presidential election, where Ross Perot was the independent candidate, one of the most viable third-party candidates we've had in a long time. And because I was a super dork and already really interested in politics and law, I actually campaigned for him at 9 years old, like went door knocking on my street to get people to vote for Ross Perot. I was very into it. And he obviously did not win. So I hitched my wagon to the wrong guy in that election. But this was like, I had civics class that year in 4th grade. So that was the thing that became really passionate for me. And I told my mom that I wanted to be the first female president. And I did this kind of review of like, how do I become president? Nobody in my family went to college. Clearly nobody in my family was like in politics or like had presidential aspirations. So I started doing this research on like, how do I become the first female president? And I realized that a lot of the presidents were lawyers. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, okay, first thing on my to-do list, I must become a lawyer. And that was the path. That was what kind of set me off onto it, was that I wanted, and maybe still desire, to be the president, and becoming a lawyer seemed like the natural path. And so I just went on from there. That was it. I had blinders on to become an attorney after that.
Wow. I mean, I can't relate, obviously, because I was full-fledged medical school, but I probably had the same thought early on. I thought for sure I wanted to be a doctor. And then I actually was in a PhD program, and I was like, this is awful. I hate this. And I left, and then discovered, like, my first job, my mentor was a lawyer. I'm like, oh, I guess like you can be a science person and do this. And that kind of changed my course. And also I was in a job that I knew that I had to do something else in order to have more jobs in the future. So this is why I am here where I am today. Yeah. But when you came, or in law school, after law school, you worked at Pepper Hamilton, right? Mm-hmm. And I think if I remember correctly, you were in litigation.
Correct.
Right. So was that like, was litigation the path that you had, when you're mapping out your road to the White House? Was litigation part of the path, or was that just, I know I fell into litigation. That's just where I am because that's what happened. I mean, was that what you had intended?
Sort of at this point. I went to college. I majored in criminal justice and psychology. I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. I had a lot of passion around our criminal justice system and how I could participate in that as a lawyer. And then I went to law school. I did an externship for a judge in Philadelphia in criminal law and realized that there is a tremendous emotional toll being involved in the criminal justice system. Also, the frank reality is law school is really expensive, and I needed to make some money. I went straight through college, law school. So although I had worked my whole life, I had never had a full-time job. So I needed to make some money. And, but I also knew that I guess parallel to the president role, I really enjoyed public speaking. So I thought litigation was easy in that way, that I wanted to be in a courtroom. I wanted to talk. I didn't want to just be at a desk looking at documents. Little did I know what life is like as a first year associate at a big law firm. You're not in the courtroom every day.
No.
But still the aspect of having oral arguments and hearings, and there's a lot of other things outside of trial that happen, that I was definitely naturally drawn to the litigation side versus the corporate side at the time. Because as we know, the story evolves.
Well, and just to backtrack on that a little bit. I mean, I think everyone has that misconception about litigation is all about trial, and trial is just so rare.
Yes.
I mean, during your tenure at Pepper, how many trials, did you actually get to go on? I think I remember. Okay. I remembered one. Okay.
Yeah, I had one, which very conveniently was in Denver. So I was there for a couple of months, and I got to have some ski weekends while we were on trial too. So that was nice. But I had one. I mean, I was there. I did a clerkship while I was there. So I did a secondment in-house while I was there. But, over the span, I was there nearly 10 years and I had one trial.
Yeah. And while a great experience, I mean, there's nothing to take away from that trial experience. And I think it's something that you need to have, because there's nothing like being in the moment and having to think that quickly and being that organized going in and then adapt as you go. But unfortunately, frankly, it's not it doesn't happen very often. Yeah. It's just not something you're going to see very often. But the preparation does. I mean,
right.
I think I've been on so many instances that you think, oh, it's definitely going to trial and you have to do all the prep. And the preparation alone, I think, is something that, really, I think builds on your experience to, anticipate what's going to come.
Yeah. And it was really beneficial. That was at the time, I was like a 4th or 5th year associate. So was still really getting, my feet wet in things. And it gave me a framework for what all the building is that you're doing in advance, right? Why are you taking these depositions? Well, because I'm going to mark them up and we're going to ask the same person on the witness stand questions that we asked them in the deposition. And we're going to be able to use that information in a completely different way, and written discovery, right? So having that, here's the end goal, and you may not always get to it, but when you do, all that prep work is super important. And we'd probably be doing clients a disservice if everything went to trial, because everything's not intended to go to trial.
Right. But, and that's just a perfect point though about the prep work, because it kind of just then kind of changes how you approach it. And because now you're more geared towards, okay, like what is the real outcome I want from this? And what questions do I need to ask to probe the answers that I'm looking for that are going to help me, not necessarily at trial, but, have an exit out of this case for my client. Yeah. So it's an extremely valuable experience, even albeit a very expensive one.
Yes. I mean, that's the one thing that I don't miss about being a practicing attorney is the discovery aspect. I really enjoy motion practice. I love writing motions to dismiss. I didn't mind like writing summary judgment motions. Obviously trial was a lot of fun, but like that in between with written discovery, interrogatories. And that was the one aspect where I wished I was a criminal defense attorney, where the prosecution's just like, here's everything. Yeah. Instead of this, like, well, let me be really careful about the way that I word this. And then you have to be really careful about the way you're responding to it on the other side. And to me, it was always like, well, let's just give everything to each other and see how this works out. Instead of discovery being, it's kind of gamified. It's part of the game of things.
And that's such a great way to put it. Cause I always find like discovery, you don't really answer anything.
No, you don't really find out a lot of information. My favorite part of discovery was taking depositions, because then I feel like you could actually get somewhere, as opposed to like how I'm trying to, sit in my office and write out these questions for written interrogatories and thinking about the objections that they're naturally going to put in response to them.
Yes.
Instead of just being in front of somebody and getting to ask them those questions.
Yeah. And that goes a lot towards too, like your affinity towards public speaking and things like that. Like you get to read your room and you read your witness, and you can, gauge how you're going to go down the path accordingly. I like depositions as much too. I hate written discovery. I find it terrible.
I was really fortunate. I had a phenomenal partner mentor who I'm still in touch with to this day. And he very much believed in learning by doing. So I got into taking depositions, just being at depositions, watching him, I think a lot earlier than a lot of my other colleagues did, which was really, really beneficial. And we did a lot of different types of cases together. He was on that trial with me. It was $1 billion class action, but we also did much smaller cases where he would say, like, I want you to run with this. I'm going to supervise, but I want you to run with this. This is your case. How would you think about things? How would you figure it out? And they were the cases that I got to go in and take depositions on too. So that was really nice. And
that's great, because a lot of times you hear like at bigger firms, you don't often get that hands-on experience like very early on. And that's awesome that you were able to like get the right mentor and be able to have that.
He was randomly assigned to me as a summer associate, and he was really involved in the summer associate process as well. And then I stayed with him and asked him to be my mentor when I got to the firm, and that was the way he was taught. You learn by doing. I'm not going to learn a lot by watching him take depositions over and over and over again. Eventually, you got to get your feet wet.
No, you're going to learn to fall asleep. That's what you're going to learn. There's only so much of that you really can do without being involved.
Right. Exactly.
So, but you're at Pepper for about 10 years, and you'd mentioned you did a clerkship during your time there. And then I believe you went in, like, what did you call it?
Secondment. I went in a house with one of our clients for a little bit too.
And how was that? Like, how did Pepper deal with that? Like, was that something they encouraged for their associates to do?
Yeah, both of those things were actually. So I was there about a year. This is a right place at right time story. So I was there about a year. I was just finishing out my first year as an associate. So I was, spending a lot of time in my office, rightfully so, earning my dues. And the partner in the office next to me was neighbors with James Greenspan, Justice Greenspan, who was getting appointed to the Supreme Court to fill out the remainder of a 16-month term. And part of her deal with getting that term was that she was not going to then run for re-election. So we knew it was a finite period of time. And my firm had a lot of federal court clerks, but not a lot of state court clerks, particularly at the Supreme Court level. So he approached me about whether I would go, and that the firm can't hold a position for me, but they are supporting me going and coming back, which I think was a little bit different from clerking right out of law school. That was one of those other things where, because I had been in the practice for about a year, I knew what I wanted to get out of clerking, right? That like, what is the thought process that these justices are going through? What are they looking for in briefs and aliquot petitions to get granted? What are they thinking about in oral argument? So that was really helpful. And then when that 16 months was up, I did go right back to the firm and then take that experience with me. And then it was, for the remainder of my time, because justices that are still on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court today were there when I was there. I was basically like an in-shop consultant for any time somebody in our firm was going to have an oral argument before the Supreme Court, would call me up and I'd say, well, this is how I know this justice likes to lean. This is what they're going to ask you about. This is, the things that you should highlight in your brief. Make sure that you bring up all the case law. Don't just bring up everything that's good for you. So that was nice to be able to kind of carve out a little niche for myself within the firm as well.
Yeah. And now I know I'm going to call you. I have these questions. Now that I know you have the real inside track, I have one right now. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
So, but eventually your tenure, you decided to leave Pepper, but I think we should preface it while you're there, your husband starts a startup called Benjamin's Desk, right?
Yes.
And were you involved? Well, at least we should back up. So can you just explain what Benjamin's Desk is? Or
yeah.
was?
So that's is as was. It's a complicated question.
Yes.
That was started. So my husband was in the military. I was, at my law firm, and we were both kind of looking for our exit strategies. When you're in the private sector, you can decide when you want to leave, and when you're in the military, you can't. So you just get contract terms, and then, you can decide whether you re-up, and then you're in for another few years or so. So we kind of mapped out our life, and he was going to exit first because he was going to be having his contract come to an end, and that was either, we were going to stay in the military or not stay in the military. So we decided that he was going to get out, and we launched this company called Benjamin's Desk, which was at the time, a 3,000 square foot co-working space. And this was in 2012. So not a ton of people knew what co-working was. But he had read an article about these places popping up in New York, and we surveyed Philadelphia. And originally that wasn't even the whole business idea. It was, let's launch this to be able to have we'll share space with other people, and eventually we'll get some other businesses off the ground too. But that in and of itself, became the business basically.
Yeah. So, but he's launching Ben's Desk while you're still at Pepper, and at the time, aren't you kind of straddling both? You're doing a little bit at each place. Well, a lot at Pepper, but helping out.
Yeah, I was basically doing all the back office stuff, the really non-glamorous things with getting a business off the ground. So obviously legal expertise comes in handy, right? I'm doing corporate entity formation, agreements, working through our lease for our first space. All of those pieces are coming together. And then I had a good amount of really self-taught financial experience, but like getting that, setting everything up on the back end. And that was kind of my nights and weekends hobby. And he was really the face of the business at the time. So very much involved in everything, but I was also working full time and, supporting us. Really just doing all the back office things.
Well, and also that type of back office work is a bit of a departure from what you were doing. I mean, it's not litigation. It's, it's contract work, which is, not something you're typically that familiar with on the litigation side. So now you're expanding your skill set outside of, the courtroom, so to speak.
Yeah. People always make jokes about lawyers having specialties, and you wouldn't go to a podiatrist with a heart problem because doctors have the same specialties. And a lot of people don't think about that in the lawyer world. And I very much felt that, where I had never negotiated a real estate lease before, but I had litigated a bunch of contracts before. So I knew what things could come up, that could be poor for us in the future. And fortunately, I had a ton of friends that were lawyers that could help out with a lot of those pieces. But as part of the work that I was doing on the litigation side, a lot of times when we would finish out a case, whether that be, settle a case, get it dismissed or whatever, if there was a contract provision that prompted that case, we were usually involved in then rewriting that contract and making something more clear or not ambiguous, or thinking about what future pitfalls could be. So I started to spread into it a little bit, which was, part of the evolution that I really liked doing that as well. As litigation is adversarial. There's usually winners and losers. And the thing that I liked about corporate work is that usually you were getting deals done to bring people together. Right. And that then everybody was winning. Everybody was there, mostly, I think, out of choice, rather than the litigation side, which usually one party was definitely not there by choice.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
And angry, and usually angry about it.
Yeah.
But eventually you reach the point that you decide to leave Pepper. And how did you approach that decision? Was it just okay, now this is taking up enough of my time and the income stream is enough over here that I don't, I don't need this other firm income stream. I can just shift.
Yeah, it was a number of factors, and you hit one on the head. My husband and I didn't come from money. We didn't have a safety net. We had to, build our own business to be able to support us. So part of it was getting the business to a point where I could leave financially. And part of it was along the way deciding what I wanted to do when I grew up, and whether that wanted to be, staying at a big law firm and pushing for the partner route, or whether I wanted to go branch out on my own. And that was something that I think I realized even when we started the business, when I was doing the back office things. I really enjoyed wearing lots of different hats. I really enjoyed the business side. And when I would do depositions or prep my clients for depositions, I realized a lot of the times I was fascinated by the business roles of the people or my clients, more so than I was about the legal aspects of the case. And it was just really small building blocks. I mean, we launched the company in 2012. I didn't leave the law firm until 2016. So it was a long time. And it was a lot of pieces that had to come together. And for me to be secure in that decision, not only financially, but also just from knowing that that's the jump that I wanted to take, where I had been somewhere for almost 10 years.
Yeah. And you had 2 kids in the process.
Yeah, they were there too. They were along for the ride as well.
But eventually you do make the switch, and now you're over at Ben's desk full time. Mm-hmm. And is your husband still there with you at that time?
He had already spun out a new company because he fancies himself a serial entrepreneur. And he had spun out a company at this point that was called Hauser. It's a residential tech-enabled real estate brokerage, and still operating and expanding today. So he spun that out. Man, the years all blow together. Yeah. So I think that was like 2014. That he had spun that out. So he was still involved in the business, but it was kind of like a role swap where now he was doing just kind of back of house things, and I ended up taking on more of the front side of things.
I don't work with my husband, and for very good reason. So how is that dynamic? I mean, I imagine it was good. You guys are still married and the business is doing well, but there has to be some challenges as, when you're running a business together and then you're going home together and not trying to like make a cutoff and not carry everything home. And so you have 2 kind of separate identities, so to speak.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons that it worked for us and that we made it work. One of which is we met when we were 12 years old. So we knew each other for 15 some years before we even started dating. So there's a lot of historical knowledge that about a person and how they work and how they don't work and when they like to work and all those pieces. Our skill sets are really complementary to each other. I'm very operationally intensive. He's really good at the vision side. So those things worked well together. We are both workaholics. So that lends itself to being entrepreneurs and having side hustles in addition to full-time jobs, because it's generally something that both of us enjoy talking about. So I think I can say with certainty that our like dinner date conversations are probably wildly different than a lot of other people's, but we still to this day, because we still do some real estate stuff together, we're always looking at spreadsheets and deals and next things and bigger things. So I think that helped that we were really mission and vision aligned. But we also did things in a super crazy way where we got married a year after we started dating. Then we bought our first house. It was a foreclosure. We fixed it up ourselves. We then launched the business. We opened 6 days after our son was born. We expanded a month after our daughter was born. So there's also this maybe suggestion of like, do as many things as possible in like the first 24 months of marriage. And that'll make you figure out very quickly whether it's going to work or it's not going to work.
Or also maybe like, it sounds like you both almost thrive on like having pressure.
Yeah.
When you have a lot going on and you don't have an opportunity to either second guess or get lazy, you just are, it seems like you're more motivated to push forward.
Yeah. As I've aged, I've gotten more, reflective on like what kind of person I am. particularly when you have kids that become embodiments of yourself. So you like see yourself in them. Just as a side note, my son is incredibly sarcastic now. He's 8 years old, and he just says things, and I'll look at my husband and go, is that what I sound like? And he's like, yes, that's exactly what you sound like. But on relation to that, there's a lot of myself that I see in my daughter, and the best adjective for her is that she is just intense. She is intense about everything she does. I would not be surprised if she became 10 years old and, tried to volunteer for a presidential election.
Right.
Because she has that same level of intensity. And yeah, I bore easily. I like to be busy. I'm always doing something. So yeah, I think we share that a lot, which is why, on Saturdays and Sundays, we're still usually talking shop or working on our businesses. And as long as we're always aligned on that, that's been helpful.
And that's, a common theme I've heard a lot from talking to entrepreneurs, though, that it is never a 9 to 5 type situation. And if you really want to be successful, you are going to live and breathe it. And so you have to really love what you do, and you have to be willing to put in the time and the sweat equity in order to get the actual, monetary value out of it.
Yeah, very much so. And, being a lawyer most of the time is not a 9 to 5 job either. No. And whatever it is, I think you're doing, you just have to like what you're doing. And then it doesn't feel like you're actually always working.
Right.
So that I enjoy a lot of the conversations that I have, a lot of the work that I do, even the keyboard banging, working on spreadsheets. I like it. So it doesn't bother me that that's still there on a Saturday morning, and I have to, get through a couple of things, and our kids have adapted to our crazy lifestyle as well.
Well, they're both going to have like their own businesses probably in the next few years anyway. So.
Yeah. My son is super into cryptocurrency right now. And he's 8.
And that's 24/7 too. That clock never turns off.
It's a really bad market because there's no market hours, like, the stock market, because it's 24/7. But yeah, their vocabulary, I think, was different than other kids, just because of the things that they would hear their parents talk about all the time. And now my son is obsessed with Bitcoin and Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies.
So now you're solely at Ben's Desk, and at that time you're CEO, right, of Ben's Desk? Okay. Yeah. So eventually, spoiler alert for everyone who's listening, then Ben's Desk in 1776 they merged, correct? And how
and that was 2017, so not long after I got there full time.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about that, because I remember you and I actually had lunch, and we did talk about it then, but we weren't on camera or being recorded at the time. So, how was that process for you? Like, how did it even start? Were you approached by 1776, which at the time was a DC based company, right? Yes. And they came to you?
Yeah, because, we had known them for a number of years. We launched in 2012. They launched in 2013. There was a lot of sharing of resources because we were doing similar things in different markets, but our markets were only, a 2-hour train ride away from each other. So we knew each other for a while. But then they approached us about joining forces in a more formal way. And this was maybe 6 months after I left the law firm, because deals always take a long time to get done. But that was intriguing to me for a number of reasons. One, it was a good expansion to get under our belt, allow us to springboard to another market, pretty much immediately without having to put in the legwork of like building up that whole community and ecosystem. We had been launched in Philadelphia now for 4 years, and we're continuing to build there. So the opportunity cost of, working with them as opposed to starting something on our own was helpful. In addition to the fact that I probably wouldn't have gone into that market because I knew what they were doing there. So there's certainly a competition analysis piece to that. And I think also having the lawyer background made it a less daunting exercise. I had done diligence before. I could do the due diligence on my own. I worked with my firm to, draft documents and other pieces, but I knew the bulk of it. So the business side didn't seem that scary, and the legal side didn't seem scary at all. So that was the big driver of going forward and effectuating us formally coming together.
And so then, I mean, this allows, well, Ben's Desk then becomes 1776.
Yes, we branded under one brand.
Yeah, and then you become the CEO of the entire
network.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So now you're in the DC market and the Philadelphia market, and how did that purchase or merge, or however you want to, the best way to describe it, I don't know, I don't do that sort of stuff. But I mean, how did it affect like the company culture? Like, was it there were growing pains at first that you have this whole group down in DC that's coming on, and you have your group in Philly that you've had a long time with you, and now you're have to be one family under this new umbrella? I mean, what were the challenges that you were facing at that time?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and we're relatively small companies in the spirit of the way mergers go in the United States. So there was things together like bringing processes together, right? They have billing, we have billing. How do we merge our accounting systems? That's like one aspect of it, which a lot of that I had built all of our back of house, systems. So I knew ours in and out. I knew theirs. I liked ours better. So we put all ours in place, and that was largely led by me as well. But then there's the people piece where we had a team in DC that was the center of their company. And now they felt like they were coming into a company that was headquartered in Philadelphia, and they were kind of a satellite. So there was a lot of navigating to be done there. One of the other drivers of the decision to merge with them was that I went to college in DC. And had a lot of connections still in Washington, D.C. And man, I was going to be so close to the White House, which is coming back.
Again, it's the path.
Yeah, it was all about this lifelong path. So I was going to be able to continue to build relationships there. So up until a year ago, when the world changed dramatically, I spent a couple of days a week in D.C. So that was great to be able to be with my team and also continue to build those relationships. But that was also really important to make sure the team there wasn't a satellite office, right? They were their own thing in DC, we were our own thing in Philly, but now we can share resources in a completely different way. And the timing of this call is great. On Monday, we are opening our Indianapolis location. So it's our first location outside of the Northeast corridor, which has been a whole nother thing of like, bringing that ecosystem in, but then also onboarding employees in a completely virtual environment where, when we had employees first start there, like I couldn't go to Indianapolis for a month. Like I wasn't allowed to leave the state basically. Right. So that's been a different environment, but yeah, it certainly came with a lot of challenges. There was a lot of business opportunities, a lot of business challenges that came with it too, of just bringing both the companies together under a single vision going forward, and how we're really going to expand and bring our people together and bring our members together too. All the companies that they were working with in DC and all the companies that we were working with in Philadelphia, to try to separate both of those ecosystems from thinking of themselves as, different than the Valley, different than New York, different than Boston when it came to being startups. And to me, it was like a 1 and 1 equals 3 scenario where like, let's bring all of our resources together and then, help these companies compete with what's being launched in the Valley and otherwise.
And that brings up a good thought for me is that, you have, or maybe to explain to our listeners a little bit. So you have these companies that come and they rent out space. So you're a shared space platform. So they come in, they rent out space. How exactly does it work? Or like, do you find these companies to come in? Do they find you? Probably a little bit of both. But how do you go about getting these clients to come and use your space and, expanding?
And I'll talk about it like pre-COVID and during COVID.
Well, yeah, I have a lot of post-COVID inquiries too.
They're very different things. So at the crux of it, co-working is a component of what we do. We have flexible space for people to be able to come in and grow their businesses. So you can come in as a solopreneur, and you can come in with a team of 10 people and a bunch of different things in between. And we can, of course, accommodate more than 10 people as well. But The real bread and butter that we provide is the resources on top of that. So we're application based across all of our campuses, and different campuses have different focuses. Some of them are industry agnostic, but some of them are really industry focused, which allows us to use the application process to source those companies. So pre-COVID, we did a lot of events. We would bring in speakers, subject matter experts, and we would bring people in and they would see the space, get a flavor of what our resources were. And that's, you know, was a big driver for us to be able to bring people in. One benefit of COVID is pushing everything virtually has allowed us to connect people across different campuses like we never have been able to before. Right. I'm in our Cherry Hill Mall, New Jersey location right now. Very rarely would we have somebody from DC come up to attend an event at Cherry Hill. But now we have people from Cherry Hill chatting with people from DC all the time because everybody's attending things virtually. At this location, we have a product focus. So we have a little market where we sell early stage consumer product goods. Our DC location is a little bit more industry agnostic. We manage the Pennovation Center on behalf of the University of Pennsylvania. We have lab space there. So we definitely have a biotech, life sciences focus at that location. So it's definitely driven towards space, which has been a really interesting time of 2020 and 2021 of operating physical workspaces in the COVID environment. But on top of that, it's really the resources. It's how do we help our companies grow by providing them connections to capital, customers, and talent is what it really comes down to.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up Cherry Hill because I personally, like, I love what you guys have done in Cherry Hill because, like, let's face it, the traditional malls as we knew them growing up are not the same as they used to be, and to use some of the space that would otherwise just be gone vacant. Now you have it for a real use, and now you're getting people in. I mean, okay, let's talk pre-COVID more so than right now, because I'll ask you later, but you're getting bodies in a mall that, you know, might then shop around in those brick and mortar stores that are in the mall, and then you're using that space in a productive way. And the shop that you have next to it's great because it's these people who may not be able to get into a big box store, but have these products that now, you know, people can find and buy. Right. And, you know, it's just a great opportunity for, like, you know, any of your like, members coming in.
Yeah. And that was the whole point of it. Was geographically, we didn't have a Southern New Jersey location. We had a bunch of locations in Philadelphia. So we wanted something on the other side of the bridge because we had a lot of members that were coming from New Jersey into Philadelphia. And if you're a member at one location, you're a member at all. So you can, you know, bounce around to different places. And then we have this unique concept called the Founders Market, where we sell the, you know, early consumer product companies that would not be able to go get an entire store and lease a store, but now they're selling their products right next to Nordstrom in the mall. So giving them exposure, giving them money from sales, but also giving them the opportunity for consumer feedback because they're iterating on their products. And that's been a big push since we were able to reopen in July of 2020, is around the shop local, shop small. So we have all of our founders have features in our store. So there's a picture of them, there's why they started the company, what their company is about. So it's really humanized and personalized. And we had a pretty good holiday season because I think now a lot more people are looking at the shop small, shop local. So we've been, you know, trying to help capitalize on that for a lot of our member companies as well.
Now that we are in this COVID world, how has that shifted things? I imagine it shifted it quite a bit. I mean, it had to have been a pivot to go from a, you know, almost like not a public working space, but a group working space to and during a time that no one even wants to leave their house.
So it's strange to think about like what we were all doing March of last year as we approach March 1st next week. But we navigated different orders across different jurisdictions. So everything was very campus specific, what was happening in each region. And Philadelphia and New Jersey were shut down earlier than Washington, D.C., as things kind of spread down from New York kind of being an epicenter all the way thinking back to last spring. And every campus was treated differently. So Governor Murphy in the state of New Jersey completely closed malls. So you couldn't come here if you wanted to come. The mall was completely shut down. And juxtapose that against the Pennovation Center where we have lab space, and we had a lot of companies there that were essential businesses, and some of them who pivoted in direct response to the pandemic and were doing testing. We had a company that actually pulled together all their 3D printers and were doing plastic printing for PPE and providing that out to different local hospitals. So we had some locations that, you know, I had to get in to check the mail a few times, and it was like an entire process to even get into the mall. Versus the Pennovation Center, which was still operating on a daily basis. So we had to look at every campus very specifically, just in terms of how we were going to operate. I kept staff at home for a really long time and was just kind of managing things myself as we were, you know, figuring out what this whole situation was about for the first few months. And certainly there's been less people in our spaces, and there's less people in our spaces now, but we've been able to, as I mentioned, switch all of our events to virtual, and so people could still access the resources, launch a new membership that's just a completely virtual membership. So a lot of our programming, we switched to public during the pandemic because we just felt like that was the right thing to do. But some of it is still member only. And now we have a membership where you could be anywhere in the world and still be able to access a lot of our member specific programming. I often talk about entrepreneurship as a roller coaster, and I think 2020 was a ride that no entrepreneur signed up for and just wanted to get off. And, you know, we had to pivot a lot of our programming too. We worked with a lot of our companies to help them pivot, help them ride through the storm. We did a lot of programming on PPP, anything that we could do in terms of getting resources to the member companies that we were working with.
Now, and did you have to do modifications to the actual spaces for, you know, like in anticipation of moving forward now that things are opening and people are going back in? I'm sure you had to, you know, do something because generally speaking, a lot of these spaces are open workspace type situations.
Yeah, we were fortunate that from a construction aspect, we didn't have to do a lot because we had already had about 50% of our spaces being closed door offices, and then only 50% being, you know, more open kitchen, you know, open common areas, kitchen areas. We had to do a lot of de-densifying though when we could open up. So a lot of our conference rooms, if it was a 12-person conference room, now it's a 6-person conference room, because we had people. There were a lot of people that were still working from home, and we had different vacancy levels at different campuses. If we had a team of 4 people that used to be working in one office, we could spread them out over a couple of offices. So keeping head counts down, being able to socially distance people, visitors not allowed in our campuses. So, a lot of people aren't hosting in-person meetings now anyway, so it's not a huge barrier. But we wanted to make sure that the people that are coming into our campuses were our members, specifically because we had to have reopening guidelines that everybody had to agree with. There were and are above and beyond whatever was required in that local jurisdiction, but every single member had to sign off on them in order to come back into campus.
Yeah, and it's totally, I mean, I think it speaks for everyone. It's totally not anything that any of us anticipated. And then, you know, and someone being in your position, like you probably never thought this was going to be like something you'd have to figure out.
Yes. It's definitely a wild ride, and nobody really has a playbook for this. So there's a lot of different business challenges where you can have a mentor to go to and say, how do I navigate this issue? But this is something that nobody during our lifetime has ever gone through before. So nobody ever really knew how to handle it. And the toughest thing for us, as well as a lot of the companies we work with, was that it still is a very unknown timeline.
Right.
Nobody came to us last March and said, hey, prepare for 12 months of decreased activity and 60 days of a full shutdown. Our first orders were for 2 weeks, and then they became 2 months, and then it just kept going and going and going. So in a lot of ways, smaller companies can adapt to those things and those changes a lot quicker. So that's one advantage, but a lot of the companies we work with are really small, and they don't have the balance sheets of other companies. So they don't have a year's worth of payroll in the bank to be able to survive a downturn like that. So it's been an emotional roller coaster of working with a lot of our companies through those times as well.
Yeah. And I'm sure like you've developed these relationships with them too. So you're rooting for them. You want to see them succeed too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's and especially when you went, I mean, you and your husband also, this was a startup at one point. This was a startup too. So you feel their pain as well.
Yeah, very much so. And that's like a lot of our staff too. You know, they don't want to get the email that says, hey, our team is now down to 3 people instead of 6 people because, you know, this has lasted too long. We have a company that at the very beginning of the pandemic were operating in the healthcare space, but not in response to the pandemic. And they had, you know, contracts out with a couple of major hospital systems that were just going to really explode the growth of their company. And then the pandemic hit and not one of their contracts got signed because everybody was focused on something else. And they're still surviving. They're still in their survive. They're not to the thrive stage yet. But, you know, we had to ride with them to make a lot of different pivots and see all the different ways that we could try to help them to just, then it was companies about like, can we just maintain status quo? Can we just ride this out right now?
So through your experience at, you know, Ben's Desk and 1776, have you seen like from your members, have you seen any like ones have crazy success that you're like, wow, they were there. They were our member. There was a time.
I can't take full credit for their success, but our very first member in Philadelphia was the Philadelphia launch of Uber.
Yeah, I remember that.
So they came in. They
gave some credit. They
gave us all these free credits. So that was great because I basically had enough free Uber credits for like an entire year. And I remember I got them to do a pitch at my law firm because they're just trying to get customers. So I brought them in and people thought it was the craziest concept. Like, why would you get in a car with another like random person and use this app in terms of getting around? So that was a great success story. More recently, the drone show, when Biden did his acceptance speech and they had a drone show in the air, that was actually one of our member companies as well.
Wow.
So that was really cool to watch. They work out of our Pennovation Center. So yeah, that's our first one being Uber and our most recent big success. They were going to perform at the inauguration ceremony, but because of no-fly zone restrictions and other pieces, they weren't able to do it. But they got that announcement down because that was down in Wilmington. So it was nice that they picked a more local company to be able to participate in that.
One of my partners is really big into drones and aviation. He'd be like geeking out right now. He loves drone talk. So switching gears because we're almost out of time, but I don't want to like jump off this without talking about this. That, you know, I think, you know, there's a general theme that you get bored easily and you have to stay busy. But one of the things that you keep very busy with is that you do Ironmans, which I don't know how on earth, and I don't know how on earth you have time to do it. I mean, I used to run marathons, but that was pre-kids, and now I can't even fathom having that much time. So, I mean, I think I know your response, but I mean, how on earth do you carve out the time between your family and super busy business to have time to train for something like an Ironman?
So there's an old saying that if you want something done, give it to a busy person, which is like my mother-in-law's favorite thing to say about me. It's also, that is my mental health release. So as crazy as 2020 is, as stressful as being an entrepreneur is, as stressful as being an attorney is, that is what I do to relax. So it sounds insane to most people, but there's a small segment of the population hopefully listening that's like, yes, I relate to what you're saying. But like after a really tough week, going out for a long run on a Saturday morning is like the way that I decompress. And then there's a couple other pieces to it. I don't train nearly as much as I should. So I train through racing. So I'll line up a ton of races that will serve as their own training runs, not that like I wouldn't go out and run 26 miles by myself. So I'll just sign up for a marathon and then go do that. Mostly everything was canceled in 2020. So that was a tough time to go through all of that, which means that a lot of those races were deferred. So I have a very busy race calendar for 2021. But also part of it was when my kids were born, I just started running with them. So I ran a number of races with them when they were younger. And then when they got to 5 and 6, I ran a marathon with them, pushing them in a stroller. And then we had a gap of not being able to train with them for a year or so. But now when I run, they ride their bikes.
Yeah.
So I've run alongside them, which is a really great distraction for people. If your kids are old enough to ride a bike next to you, they're horrible at providing like a general pace, but it keeps you super distracted from focusing on whether you're in pain or not. So I still get to balance that. Like, how am I spending time with them? Also taking time away. And for them, participating in the races, kind of growing up in that lifestyle, we spend a lot of time at my races. So going away for weekends at a time. Ironmans are long, right? It's not like you show up for an hour. They're the entire day. And you usually have to be there 2 days before, and you're not leaving until the day after. And then mommy has trouble walking for a week after these races. But that's, part of why, a lot of parents do what they do is to be a role model. And for my kids, that's just like part of life to them. It's like, oh yeah, well, you could do an Ironman. It's the demonstration of like the Ironman slogan, anything is possible. That they can look and be like, oh yeah, well, like to them, they already ran a marathon. So it's like, well, they can just run a marathon when they're older, instead of a lot of people thinking about, well, it's such a goal and it's so long and it's such a big deal. I feel like we've brought down a lot of those mental barriers for our kids in a lot of different areas. And my hope is that physical activity and running is, just another one of those areas. But the number one thing, even with, races taken away in 2020, it's such a big stress relief for me. It's where I do my best thinking. It's where I love to be. And I'm an outside person. So having gyms closed didn't affect me as much, because I'll run when it's cold and when it's hot and when it's raining and when it's sleeting or any of those things. I won't bike in all of that weather, but I will run in all of that weather.
Yeah. Or swim.
Yeah. Swimming, I mostly just do in the summertime. Again, goes back to that I don't train as much as I should mantra.
But how did it evolve? Because I mean, I remember, I think we both ran the Philadelphia Marathon the same. I think we tried to meet up and we didn't get together. And I think it was like, it may have been your first marathon or your second. It was very early on.
It was my second. Yeah.
And like, I ran a bunch of marathons and I never made the step to be like, okay, now I'm going to do all this other things. And maybe it was a straight up fear of the swim, or I just didn't have a bike, or I don't know what it was for myself. But how did you make the jump over from, the marathons to doing the whole trifecta?
So I've been running my whole life. Most triathletes come from one of the disciplines. And I started running when I was very young, mostly because I lack hand-eye coordination. So track was a great sport for me. So I ran forever. And the summer that we took the bar exam, I needed something else to distract me from being completely consumed by studying for the bar exam. So I signed up for a sprint triathlon that was like 2 weeks after the bar exam. So I would swim at St. Mary's of Villanova. So like we would get done our bar class, I would study in the library for a while, and then I would go swim or I would hop on a bike, but I just needed something to distract myself from it. And much like the first job that I wanted was being president, I typically set my sights pretty high on like anything. So I was pretty young, I think, when I heard about an Ironman and was like, yeah, I definitely want to do that. And then I did that sprint triathlon, loved it. And honestly, although I was relatively still young, marathon running constantly just kind of beats up your body. So I liked the fact that swimming and biking was kind of helping in a more cardiovascular way and helped prevent injuries and other things. And then when I started at my law firm a few weeks after the race, a partner down the hall from me had a bunch of Ironman medals in her office. And I was like, oh, I totally want to do an Ironman. I have a 5-year plan. Like, this is how I'm going to get there. I'm going to do these number of marathons and these number of races to build up to it. And she was like, 5 years is way too long. Let's do it in 2. And I was like, great. So I did it in 2. So again, going back to that level of intensity thing, where I tend to shorten timelines to achieve lofty goals. And then I just got hooked. Then I loved it. I love the camaraderie. I love the community of Ironmans and races. And then, have more recently kind of ventured out into ultra marathons. Cause then it was like, well, what's next? There's there's double and triple Ironmans. So
the sky is the limit.
The sky is the limit. The problem is that then when you become part of these communities, you get introduced to other likewise like-minded, intense people that will then tell you about other ridiculous, crazy races. So you just kind of keep going on those paths.
But it's good to be challenged.
Yeah. Again, goes back to intensity, and I don't really like to be bored. So I seek those things out. And I think in a lot of ways, I seek those people out too. We're a good community for each other.
You all stick together.
Yeah.
So, final question though. So we started off talking about, how your, you went to law school because you wanted to be president. Are you still on the path to the White House? Or have you veered off course, or anything possible at this point?
So I would say anything is possible. But I think a few years ago, I realized that maybe I didn't want to be an elected official, but I still wanted to be involved in politics. So I think it's still part of my long life plan, among other things, that I'll make it back to DC in a full-time capacity. I'm thinking more now about like how I take the work that I've done now with small businesses, economic development, like how do I parlay that as a passion into some work in the government. So I see that as part of my future, although I'm not exactly sure how it will play out yet. I'm not entirely sure I want to be president, or if I want to just be somebody behind the scenes kind of running a lot of that.
Yeah, I guess we'll wait and see.
Yeah.
Suspense.
Yeah.
Well, Jen, thanks so much for coming on. And before we sign off, just if you want to let everyone know where they can find you in 1776, to let them know, their friends know, everyone else know, if they to find you guys.
Yeah, thank you for that. You can go to our website. It's www.1776.vc, venture capital. So you can go on our website, see all the locations that we have, the resources that we can offer, and hopefully welcome some of your listeners into our spaces and resources.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Megan.